We are seeing debates from state to state regarding Bitcoin. Some states are very pro-Bitcoin. Texas is pretty pro-Bitcoin. Wyoming is pretty pro-Bitcoin. Even here in Florida, it's fairly pro-Bitcoin. And then we're seeing states which have a slightly different approach, which maybe New York, you would say, is a little bit more cynical regarding Bitcoin. And this is the cool thing about living in a republic, is that you get to vote with your feet. Right. States compete, and you can go where the laws are that you prefer, which is great. But therefore, there are people proposing in certain states that Bitcoin becomes legal tender. I see Dennis Porter talking about this relentlessly.
Right. Yeah. Arizona had a proposal that was just straight up Bitcoin is legal tender.
Okay.
The definition of Bitcoin is very simplistic and probably wouldn't work, but yeah.
But what that is a proposed bill.
Yeah.
What is the actual process that has to go through to be ratified in, say, in Arizona?
Right. So if Arizona were to pass that bill, so the legislature would pass it, and then the governor would sign it into law, and it would just be the law of the land until someone challenged it.
Right.
And the way that would come up in that instance is somebody would try to discharge their debt with Bitcoin, and then the creditor would refuse to accept, and then the debtor would have to sue, and then you'd go along from there all the way up it'd be in state court at first, and then you'd have arguments that it violates Article 1, Section 10, and all the way up to wherever.
And when it ends at the Supreme Court, then you have the precedent that sets it. Interesting.
Yeah.
So are you doing this work to help guide people, or why are you doing this?
Right. Exactly. So that is the question. Why am I doing this? Again, it is to help guide people and to help guide the policy. To help people think about things a little more critically, and to put these arguments out there so that these arguments exist. And so if there's ever a court case, it's kind of like open sourcing these arguments, right?
I get it.
I want people to join in and provide some counter arguments and poke holes, and let's really vet this, because good policy should come out of that open discussion. Hopefully before we get to a big case where we're arguing over constitutionality of legal tender. The Arizona bill is not going to get. That was just kind of a political stunt, right? That's not really going anywhere.
That's a hack.
Yeah.
Get some Bitcoiners to follow me.
It is a hack. It's the Bitcoin hack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We know it exists because we get approached by nearly every single one who wants to come on the show. They're going to get followers. But fine. In some ways, maybe that's the way it should be. If that hack exists and it works, it's because it's the will of the people to want it.
So now, and I want to go in and say, I've made this argument that I think is pretty strong, that, the original intent of this section should include Bitcoin. I personally don't like the idea of legal tender.
So that was like my final. We were going to start with this, and then me and Danny agreed this should be the final question, because we met up last night. We went out for tacos. And Mexican and a couple of beers, and you said, I don't think Bitcoin should be legal tender.
Right. And so this is because, going back to that definition of legal tender, it only applies to pre-existing debts. But what it's doing is it's impairing those debts. It's impairing that private contract between two, consenting individuals. That freedom of contract has been eliminated, because now, as the creditor, I have to accept Bitcoin, and that's not what I agreed to.
And legal tender always has to retrospectively apply to legal.
Yeah.
You couldn't have it for all contracts post ratification.
You could put that proviso in the law. I mean, sure, but
you still don't think it should be legal tender.
Because yes, I would be more in favor of something like that, where it said we're going to apply this prospectively. But the other thing that legal tender laws do, right, is they favor one money over the others, right, and it eliminates that kind of free, economic process that happens when you have new commodities, new goods that come onto the market, and that natural monetization process. We're all Bitcoiners, but I think we want the best money to win.
Yes.
Right. And right now that's Bitcoin. But it might not always be Bitcoin.
And is there another risk that if Bitcoin did become legal tender, there would be an argument for shitcoin A, shitcoin B to be legal tender?
Oh yeah, that's definitely a risk. But I think the more important thing to consider. Yeah, I mean, that's a risk. But again, it comes back to, I think we all want freedom, right? That's why Bitcoin exists, is to be apolitical freedom money separate from the state.
Uh-huh. And
when you start to then advocate for the state to come and be involved in your freedom money, I hate the phrase slippery slope, but it starts to be a slippery slope, because first it starts as legal tender, and then it moves to compulsory tender. Everyone has to accept it for all transactions.
Which was one of the big criticisms with El Salvador.
That's right. And then it moves to, well, maybe if everyone's got to accept it, then maybe the governments just start, fixing the price, which never works with any money, right? But, and especially won't work with Bitcoin, but causes a lot of headaches for everyone. So that's the danger of, and again, if this is we're supposed to be separating the state from money, just like the founders wanted to do, is to keep the state out of the money, to keep our freedoms and our liberties intact. And that's what Satoshi wanted to do. And that was the cypherpunk movement, was to keep our liberties intact by, granting the government limited permissions where possible. So I find it a little hypocritical of some Bitcoiners who are actively, look, if they're in Bitcoin for their bags, right, and they know that states accepting it as legal tender is going to increase the price and they're going to profit, like, that's fine. You do you, but like, don't then say you're in it for freedom and human rights, because those things are starting to be in conflict.
Well, or maybe they didn't understand it to the extent that you've explained it just now. Because
maybe.
Okay, let's go back 24 hours. Somebody said to me, Arizona, Texas, Wyoming are all going to make Bitcoin legal tender. I'm not thinking about my bags. I'm just thinking, wow, that gives us extra regulatory protection because it's now legal tender.
Right.
It advances the opportunity for more people to consider and own Bitcoin to escape the fiat system. To me, it kind of in some ways feels like it provides more freedom. It's only by having this hour plus I've had with you now that I now understand it actually reduces your freedom.
Well, and you're correct that it absolutely would bring those beneficial aspects of shining light on Bitcoin and getting everyone aware of it.
But it reduces your freedom.
It does. It's going to reduce your freedoms. And look, people are going to say, well, it's inevitable. Like, governments are going to do this anyways, and yeah, they probably will, but like, let's not invite the government in now when we still have time to, strengthen Bitcoin against attacks, be they governmental or otherwise. The other thing is there are alternative policies that achieve those same, beneficial results.
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
What legal protections would you like to see?
Right. And you're starting to see them, right? Gillibrand and Lummis's crypto digital asset law, which is going to provide a tax exemption on transactions under $600. That's great. I think that's what a lot of people want.
Which rises with inflation. Which rises with inflation. A really smart clause.
It is. It's a really smart clause, and I hope it stays in. And I hope I would be in favor of a larger initial transaction limit, but $600 is great. I just hope it doesn't get batted down, when it comes to the backdoor fights with Treasury and everyone else.
But that's a federal bill.
Yeah, that's a federal bill. It's not something that states can do. States, I'd like to see Bitcoin clauses like the gold clauses we were talking about in contracts, and then I'd like to see states passing bills that say, any money you want that you contract for, like that's what the judgment has to be satisfied in. Because otherwise you get a situation where we contract in Bitcoin and there's no USD denomination whatsoever in our contract. One Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. And then, we get into a dispute. You win a judgment against me, because I didn't pay you the Bitcoin. But because USD is legal tender, the government says, well, it's, one Bitcoin is equal to $19,000. So here's your $19,000. But you don't want the $19,000. You want the Bitcoin, right? So unless you have those laws that are saying we're going to respect freedom of contract and, whatever money is chosen by the consenting parties, it's you can put all the clauses you want in your contract, but if you have to enforce them, they're not going to be enforced the way you want. So that's something the states can do, and that is a general purpose law that would encompass all altcoins, encompass anything, encompass tobacco notes, maybe.
Is there a group of Bitcoin interested lawyers who are actively getting together and discussing these things? Do you have a cohort that you are working with on these discussions? Because I think, like I've said, I think some people pushing towards having legal tender perhaps don't understand the implications of it. A bit like you have the Bitcoin Policy Institute working on educating within the Congress, hopefully. Do you have a cohort where you're out there actually trying to help people who are pushing for changes to legislation?
So it's interesting talking about a cohort of Bitcoin lawyers. There aren't too many. There's tons of digital asset lawyers who are very smart and very good at what they do.
Well, they're going to be busy helping people with the SEC.
Exactly. And there are groups of those that are, kind of more in like the DAO space.
Yeah.
And there's, DAOs of lawyers who get together. But it's not Bitcoin focused. There aren't too many lawyers who are Bitcoin focused.
But there might be some who are interested, like yourself. And I just think if that cohort existed, then you could be having those discussions, debates about the implications of some of the things people are doing. And then you could help educate via my show or via a Twitter space or when Dennis Porter is pushing something.
So what I'm actively exploring now is putting together a kind of an amicus program or a judicial education program. And I've been in talks with some policy groups. Nothing's settled yet, so I'm not gonna say anything about it. But this is what I'm exploring doing, and educating the policy makers and those who are advocating for policy, but also the judiciary, because the groups like Bitcoin Policy Institute and the Bitcoin Today Coalition, they're focused on talking to lawmakers and talking to the agency, enforcement arms, but they're not talking to the judiciary yet. And so what you've got the lawmakers who are going to make the law are being educated on Bitcoin. You've got the agencies who are going to enforce the laws being educated on Bitcoin. But then the judiciary who's going to review that enforcement are not being educated on Bitcoin. And so, I kind of like to think of those three, it's the three, it's the separation of powers. You have the Congress, the agencies are in the executive and the judiciary. It's kind of like Bitcoin, right? The lawmakers are kind of like the devs.
Yeah.
Right? They write the code, they write the law, and then the miners are kind of like the agencies. They enforce, they run the code, they enforce the protocol. But then you've also got validator nodes who check the work of the enforcement prong, and that's the judiciary.
Interesting.
And we haven't had much outreach to the judiciary yet. So that's what I'm exploring doing is helping either through appearing in cases on behalf of interested policy groups to file amicus briefs. Coin Center does this work.
Yeah.
And they're super smart guys over there, and they've been doing it a hell of a lot longer than I have. But they're a large tent, and they're not focused expressly on Bitcoin. So to get a group together that would be interested in doing that, that's one of the things I'm exploring now.